June 15th, 1943. A farmhouse outside Caen, northern France. A German patrol moves cautiously through the pre-dawn darkness, their boots crunching on gravel as they approach what intelligence suggests is a resistance weapons cache. The Feldwebel raises his hand. His men freeze. There's a sound, peculiar, almost comical, like someone vigorously pumping a bicycle tire. Then silence. The soldiers exchange glances. One suppresses a nervous laugh. What kind of weapon makes that noise? The answer comes 30 seconds later when the Feldwebel's chest erupts in a spray of red mist. No gunshot. No warning. Just the dull thump of a spring releasing, and a man falling dead with a steel rod protruding from his ribcage. His soldiers scatter, shouting in confusion, firing wildly at shadows. They cannot see their attacker. They cannot hear the weapon. They cannot comprehend what has just killed their sergeant. 2 more men drop before the patrol retreats in disorder, leaving their dead behind, reporting to their officers that the British have deployed some manner of silent crossbow. Their superiors laugh. Crossbows, in 1943, absurd. But the weapon that killed those men was no medieval relic. It was the Welrod, the most unusual assassination tool ever mass-produced by a modern military power. A bolt-action pistol designed to be completely silent. A weapon so strange in concept and execution that German intelligence initially dismissed reports of its existence as resistance propaganda. They were wrong. Between 1943 and 1945, the Welrod would be deployed across occupied Europe, creating a legend of silent death that terrified the Wehrmacht and the Gestapo alike. This is the story of how British engineers created a weapon that shouldn't work, that looked ridiculous, and that became one of the most effective close-quarters assassination tools in military history. By 1942, Britain faced a problem that conventional weapons could not solve. Across occupied Europe, resistance networks were conducting assassination operations against German officers, collaborators, and infrastructure personnel. These operations were essential. Every dead collaborator was a message to others. Every eliminated Gestapo officer was a blow to occupation morale. But the weapons available for such work were catastrophically inadequate. Standard pistols were too loud. A single gunshot would bring every German soldier within 300 meters running towards the sound. Resistance fighters using conventional firearms had perhaps 30 seconds to escape before the area swarmed with enemy troops. Most didn't make it. Survival rates for assassination missions using standard weapons hovered around 40%. 60% of operatives died or were captured, tortured, and executed. The mathematics were unsustainable. Knives were silent, but required proximity and skill that few possessed. Strangling a sentry sounds straightforward until you're actually attempting it. The human body fights desperately for life, and struggles are loud and long. Poison was unreliable, slow-acting, and left evidence that pointed directly to murder rather than natural causes. The Special Operations Executive needed something else entirely. Something that combined the silence of a blade with the stopping power of a firearm. Something that would kill instantly and silently at conversational distance. The problem seemed insoluble. Firearms are loud because expanding gases from burning propellant exit the barrel at supersonic speeds, creating a sonic boom. Suppressors could reduce this noise somewhat, but even the best designs of 1942 only brought gunshots down to roughly the volume of a hammer striking wood, still audible at 50 meters or more. What the SOE needed was a weapon that produced no more noise than a hand clapping. 70 decibels maximum, about the volume of normal conversation. Every weapons designer consulted said the same thing: impossible. You cannot silence a firearm completely without destroying its effectiveness. The gas has to go somewhere. The mechanical action of a semi-automatic pistol creates noise even if you silence the barrel. Even if you somehow achieved near silence, the weapon would be enormous, impractical, and too delicate for field use. The British were asking for a unicorn. They got one anyway. The solution came from Station 9, a secret facility at Welwyn Garden City in Hertfordshire. This was where the Ministry of Supply's Inter-Service Research Bureau designed specialist equipment for clandestine warfare. The team was led by Major Hugh Reeves, assisted by a group of engineers whose names remain largely classified even today. What they created looked less like a weapon and more like a piece of industrial piping with a trigger. The Welrod, the name derived from Welwyn, the facility's location, was a bolt-action pistol built entirely around the principle of suppression. Where conventional suppressors are attachments added to existing firearms, the Welrod was designed from first principles as a single integrated silencing system. The barrel and suppressor were one unit. Every component existed solely to eliminate noise. The weapon measured just over 300 millimeters long, about the length of a standard ruler. It weighed 1 kilogram, roughly equivalent to a bag of sugar. The working parts were brutally simple. A tubular body contained the barrel, surrounded by a series of expansion chambers separated by rubber wipes, circular baffles with small holes that the bullet passed through. Behind this sat a bolt-action mechanism operated by a knurled knob at the rear. No magazine, just a single-shot design with a simple 6-round internal magazine that required manual cycling between shots. The ammunition was .32 ACP, chosen specifically because it was subsonic. Standard bullets travel faster than sound, creating a supersonic crack even if the gun itself is silenced. The .32 ACP cartridge used in the Welrod traveled at roughly 280 meters per second, comfortably below the 340 meters per second speed of sound. This meant no sonic boom, no crack, just the mechanical thump of the action and the whisper of the bullet passing through air. When fired, the weapon produced approximately 73 decibels of sound. For context, that's quieter than a vacuum cleaner, roughly equivalent to a car door closing, and significantly quieter than normal conversation at 1 meter distance. At 5 meters, the typical engagement range for assassination work, the Welrod was effectively inaudible against urban background noise. A guard standing 3 meters from his companion would not hear his comrade being shot. Manufacturing took place at several facilities, with final assembly conducted at a facility in Birmingham. The parts were deliberately simple: steel tubing, rubber wipes, basic bolt components. This was intentional. Complex weapons break in the field. The Welrod needed to function after being dropped in mud, submerged in rivers, and carried for weeks in damp conditions. It needed to be maintainable by operatives with minimal training and no access to gunsmiths. Production numbers remain partially classified, but estimates suggest between 2,800 and 3,500 units were manufactured between 1943 and 1945. Each weapon was issued without serial numbers, making them impossible to trace. If a Welrod was recovered by German forces, it revealed nothing about where it came from, who made it, or how many existed. The Welrod reached occupied Europe through multiple channels. SOE operatives parachuting into France carried them as personal weapons. Supply drops to resistance networks included them alongside Sten guns and plastic explosives. Some were smuggled across borders in diplomatic pouches. By mid-1943, Welrods were operating in France, Norway, Denmark, Poland, and Italy. Operational accounts are sparse. Assassination missions rarely generate detailed after-action reports. But fragments survive. In Denmark, a resistance cell used a Welrod to eliminate a Gestapo informant in a Copenhagen cafe. The target was shot at his table while his companions sat 3 meters away, continuing their conversation for several seconds before noticing he had slumped forward. By the time they raised the alarm, the shooter had walked calmly out of the cafe and vanished into the crowd. In France, SOE operative Harry Ray used a Welrod during multiple operations around the Peugeot works at Sochaux. He described the weapon's psychological effect on German occupation forces as profound. After several silent killings, sentries began refusing night guard duty. Officers required escorts even for short trips. The occupiers became frightened of the dark itself, knowing that death could arrive without warning or sound. The weapon's strangest characteristic was its complete lack of muzzle flash. Most firearms produce a visible flash when fired, especially in darkness. The Welrod produced nothing. No flash, no smoke, no visible indication it had been discharged beyond the slight movement of the bolt. This made counterfire essentially impossible. Even if someone heard the weapon's quiet report, they couldn't determine the shooter's location without the visual reference of muzzle flash. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. German attempts to counter the Welrod bordered on farcical. Wehrmacht intelligence initially refused to believe the weapon existed, dismissing resistance reports as psychological warfare. When a Welrod was finally captured in France in late 1943, German engineers examined it and concluded it was a prototype. Surely the British couldn't be mass-producing something this crude and effective. They were wrong. By 1944, captured documents show Wehrmacht security services were specifically warning troops about British silent pistols and advising extreme caution during any close-quarters engagement. The Germans never developed an equivalent weapon. Their suppressor technology lagged significantly behind British developments. The closest German equivalent was the Walther PK, fitted with a screw-on suppressor, but this reduced sound to only about 95 decibels, still clearly audible as a gunshot at 20 meters. More critically, German suppressors wore out quickly, becoming ineffective after 50 rounds or less. The Welrod's rubber wipes needed replacement after approximately 12 shots, but replacement was simple. Unscrew the front cap, remove old wipes, insert new ones. An operative could carry spare wipes and replace them in the field in under 2 minutes. American intelligence learned of the Welrod through liaison with the SOE and requested samples for evaluation. The Office of Strategic Services tested the weapon extensively and concluded it was the most effective silent killing device yet developed. However, American production of an equivalent weapon eventually designated the Woolworth pistol, and later the Liberator M1942, never matched the Welrod's suppression characteristics. American engineers struggled to replicate the British rubber wipe design, and their metal baffle alternatives proved significantly louder. The Soviets, characteristically, simply stole the design. NKVD operatives working in Britain acquired detailed plans through penetration of SOE support staff. The Soviet Union began producing near-identical copies, designated the MSP Silent Pistol, in 1944. Post-war, these weapons appeared across Eastern Europe, and examples were recovered from KGB operations well into the 1960s. What made the Welrod superior to all these alternatives was its integration. German and American weapons treated suppression as an add-on feature. The Welrod was suppression. Every millimeter of its design served the single purpose of eliminating sound whilst maintaining killing power. This single-minded focus on one objective at the expense of all others gave it capabilities no other weapon could match. The Welrod's historical impact is difficult to quantify precisely because its very purpose was to kill without evidence. We know it was used, we know it was effective, but exact numbers of eliminations remain unknown, buried in classified files or lost entirely. What is documented is the psychological effect. German occupation forces in Western Europe became increasingly paranoid about close-quarters encounters after 1943. Security protocols changed. Officers traveled with larger escorts. Sentries were posted in pairs rather than singly. The mere existence of the Welrod altered enemy behavior patterns in measurable ways. From a technical standpoint, the Welrod influenced suppressor design for decades. The principle of rubber wipes as baffle material became standard in clandestine weapons development. The British continued using the design through the Cold War, producing an updated version, the Welrod Mark II, in the 1950s. Special forces worldwide studied the weapon's design principles. Modern suppressed pistols owe a direct lineage to the decisions made at Station 9 in 1942. Perhaps more significantly, the Welrod demonstrated that unconventional problems required unconventional solutions. The British military establishment of 1942 considered silent pistols to be fantasy weapons, suitable for spy novels but not serious warfare. Station 9 proved them wrong by ignoring conventional wisdom entirely and designing for a single purpose with absolute focus. Sometimes the strangest solution is the correct one. Surviving examples of the Welrod can be found in several museums. The Imperial War Museum in London holds multiple examples, including a rare Mark I variant with its original leather holster. The Royal Armouries in Leeds displays a cutaway model showing the internal baffle arrangement. These museum pieces convey something of the weapon's peculiar appearance. It genuinely looks like someone attached a pistol grip to a piece of plumbing, but they cannot convey the eerie silence of its operation. For that, you would need to fire one, and firing antique assassination weapons is generally discouraged by museum curators. The Welrod remained in limited service with British Special Forces into the 1990s. Even as firearms technology advanced dramatically, semi-automatic pistols, advanced metallurgy, computer-designed suppressors, the basic Welrod design remained competitive for close-range silent killing. Its simplicity was its strength. Modern suppressed pistols are more sophisticated, but they're also more complex, more expensive, and more prone to failure. The Welrod was a hammer, crude, effective, and nearly impossible to break. That farmhouse outside Caen in 1943, the German patrol that stumbled into darkness and encountered something they couldn't understand. The Feldwebel dying without hearing the weapon that killed him. His men fleeing in terror from an enemy they couldn't fight because they couldn't locate the source of silent death. This was the Welrod's purpose, distilled into a single moment. Not to win battles or destroy tanks or sink ships. To eliminate specific individuals silently, creating terror in the enemy whilst preserving the operative who pulled the trigger. It was a weapon designed for murder. There's no gentler word for it. But murder in the service of liberation. Every collaborator eliminated was a message. Every Gestapo officer killed was a calculation that saved lives by disrupting the machinery of occupation. The Germans thought it was a joke until it started killing them. Then they thought it was impossible. Then they thought it was a prototype. By the time they realized the truth, that the British had mass-produced a weapon that shouldn't exist and deployed it across occupied Europe, it was too late. The whisper had become a scream. The ridiculous tube of metal had become a legend. 33 centimeters of steel pipe, rubber, and springs. 73 decibels. Death at conversational distance. The Welrod killed silently, effectively, and without mercy. It killed sentries and informants and officers. It killed in cafes and on dark roads and in quiet rooms. It killed, and the enemy never heard it coming. That's not a metaphor. That's engineering.